Welcome to Fully Diluted, Messari's enterprise podcast covering the top protocols in crypto. We're joined here today with Neurotic and DNB.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for making this happen.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Always great to speak to you guys.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. So let's just get right into it. What is Anyone? Love to know more about what you're working on and why you chose to work on this problem.
As you did mention earlier, Anyone is a DePIN privacy project. We see ourselves as sort of one or two iterations above the VPN, and we call ourselves a privacy layer for the internet. And the reason we set up is obviously internet privacy is this massive growing issue. VPN usage is up 3 or 5x over the past 10 years. But the traditional solutions to privacy, namely the VPN, in our view, doesn't solve the problem at all. You have now a centralized server that can track, log, and leak everything. And privacy is still sort of seen as the individual's responsibility and not something built into apps. And so we built up Anyone protocol as an onion routing network that gives you trustless privacy that you can integrate right into your apps. And we're hoping to kind of change the whole paradigm for privacy and make it built into everything for every internet user.
Awesome. Very cool. Yeah, I'd love to dive a bit deeper into this privacy issue. So listeners probably familiar with VPNs. Maybe they use it just in their general crypto activities. What's really like the core issue here in terms of privacy preservation and what's really the issue here?
Yeah, I could take that. Look, 10 years ago, if you said you're using a VPN, it might raise some eyebrows. Now it is sort of the norm, not just for crypto enthusiasts, but like across the world. The problem with VPNs is, although the encryption standards it actually uses is incredibly secure, you are trusting a third-party company or server with that data. It basically encrypts your information from your home computer and it's decrypted on the VPN server. All of these corporations tend to log it, even if they don't have a no logging policy. If enough people abuse that VPN provider, the internet provider will cut them off. It's just they always keep logs. So that's just one element of it. You have people using VPNs that are centralized. You have governments, organizations, and big corporations sort of actively tapping and sniffing data. Some of the biggest leaks were like from Edward Snowden over 10 years ago. And you can only imagine with the enhancements of AI, more people using cloud-based services, how much more of your rights data is being infringed upon. There's multiple aspects. ISPs are sniffing it. If you look at the UK, every fiber cable that comes in and out of the country is being tapped. It's just sort of getting out of control. So there isn't one cybersecurity solution to protect you from everything, but certainly Anyone is a very good layer for protecting your information and data on the internet.
Gotcha. Makes sense. So let's get a bit into the architecture here. Using DePIN as your general solution, why use DePIN? How does it increase decentralization? How does it increase privacy?
To answer that kind of second question, why use DePIN? I think the special thing about this project in the context of Web3 is you really wouldn't be able to do something like this without DePIN incentives. And that's because the core value proposition of this network is that it fragments your data among multiple servers run by different individuals. And so one single sort of Web2 company wouldn't be able to create the same privacy guarantees because they'd naturally be running all of the servers and be able to piece together the data. By creating this sort of permissionless environment to let anyone run this piece of software and be incentivized to do so, we create a very diverse and resilient network. We can sort of almost guarantee, by nature of how the token and nodes distributed, has the diversity needed to secure privacy. And more broadly about the architecture, we use a protocol called onion routing, which was first popularized by Tor. And we've sort of taken that technology and with DePIN incentives and targeted rewards for specific types of activity in nodes, being able to sort of supercharge it and create one of the fastest onion routing networks in the world.
Yeah, could you run us through exactly how a user's data is routed on your network?
Yeah, I can take that. So there's two angles here. You can access the clear web, which is the traditional web, or within the Anyone network. So the way it works, if I'll not go into too much detail, but the packet will go through what we call hops. So it's 3 nodes. Every time the packet goes through a node, a circuit gets built between each node, and the source IP address changes every time it goes through the node. Now, those circuits are built up of the same technology that's used in the VPN stack. It just goes through 3 separate nodes, and the source IP address changes after each hop throughout the node. That means it's very difficult to identify your end IP address or location. If you're accessing the clear web, like google.com, the packet flow will go out of a node called an exit node, and then it will traverse to the internet. So actually, Google will see your IP address as the exit node. For us, the hardware itself that we are mass producing allows people to set up by default relay nodes, which isn't an exit node, which we want more experienced people to do that, who are aware of the sort of operational and legal sort of requirements you have with that. The beauty, to actually provision one of these nodes on a virtual server or your own hardware isn't too complex, but it does require command line access. So that's the beauty of the DePIN hardware, because it's plug and play. This protocol and this tech stack is for anyone, not just technical or developer-centric individuals.
Cool. Could you go a bit more into these relay nodes? What specifically are they? Do users need to acquire them? Is that more from an independent manufacturer, or do you guys provide access yourself?
We want to lower the barriers to entry as far as possible. So we kind of have 2 options for people who want to run a node. They can choose to run the software themselves on their own server or an old piece of hardware and simply need to lock a small number of tokens to do so. Or they can purchase this router hardware that we have, plug it into their home router and do it as a non-technical user. So right now, the majority of nodes and the majority of bandwidth is in these sort of self-hosted relays, which I think makes sense. That's the cheapest way to scale. And the hardware kind of adds a valuable diversity to the network and is a funnel to bring in users too.
And I think the hardware itself has additional utility. If you look at how you're probably using the internet at the minute, you probably are using a VPN client. You have to install that on each device. So that could be annoying, and it's not a seamless browsing experience. With the any one node, it can also act as, almost think of it like a VPN router. So you can protect all of your internal network traffic, not just your laptop. And it should mitigate protocol leaks, which can happen. Not everything gets routed over your VPN. So I think that's really important when you're thinking about the growth of IoT and your smart camera and like all these devices that are accessing the internet and you might not even know it, especially the surge of IP version 6. So really having something on the edge of your home network that encrypts things by default, or gives you the flexibility to not encrypt it if you don't want, depending on how sensitive it is a really powerful thing that should cater not just to Web3 people, but Web2 as well.
Cool. So I think that kind of brings me to the DePIN incentive mechanism. So how specifically is the supply side rewarded for supplying infrastructure to the network? On the demand side, how specifically is revenue or value being generated?
So on the supply side, we have sort of a simple emission of tokens. And because it's so relatively cheap to spin up one of these nodes and run the software, we are able to get away with a very low inflation rate of just around 3% of the circulating supply every year. Right now, the majority of that is from inflation as opposed to from revenue, but that's obviously an equilibrium that we're on the path of reaching. And nodes are essentially rewarded for remaining up and providing bandwidth. So we have these periodic bandwidth tests that form the basis of distribution to all of these relays. And like a lot of DePIN projects, we have more or less a fixed outflow of tokens, and then the number of nodes sort of scale up and down to reach an equilibrium. And currently we have 10,000 nodes, and we're ramping up the reward rate 4x over the next few months to its eventual percent inflation. So far, with very limited outflow, we're able to support already one of the largest onion routing networks in the world. Right now, the network is completely free to use as we sort of scale and get to our first 100,000 or 1 million daily active users. But the plan is to have it be a freemium network as speeds begin to saturate. People who can make use of the best nodes or enterprises that grant this functionality to potentially thousands of app installs using it, can pay to access sort of faster speeds.
How do you go about estimating or kind of thinking about the market size here?
That's a good question, because there are so many different potential buckets that we can eat into. We have the traditional consumer VPN market, where that's obviously been growing, multiples over the past 10 years, where I think we're maybe a little bit early, but there is going to be a fundamental shift in the way people think about VPNs. I think it just takes one big hack or leak for people to realize that the vast majority of VPNs are not really protecting their privacy. And so we have an angle there to come in with a unique, genuinely trustless solution for privacy. And then that's a market we sort of need to take head on by creating better and superior apps. The other side is sort of an entirely new market of what I would call privacy-preserving apps. And that's where I think we have the most sort of legs to scale, because as use cases that integrate us grow, so do we. And we kind of can benefit from this exponential growth as the apps that are built on us get users of their own right. So think browsing apps. We've already had our first Web3 browser called Carbon, or a different project, called Carbon, that have come in and used anyone to provide a better privacy for their incognito mode. We're beginning to see some DePIN projects or AI like Eliza OS integrate anyone as a privacy plugin. That integration alone brought us 50,000 installs over the past month. So I think the path to gaining maximum adoption is being part of the next generation of apps that solve these problems and not trying to define too much as a team the exact use cases that are pushed.
Yeah, I agree with that. I always say it's about empowering developers, and anyone protocol is like a Swiss Army knife for any developer or builder who's privacy focused and centric, which nowadays I think something you can't really take for granted.
Yeah. So when designing your tokenomics, we see various models emerging over the last few years: buy and burn and mint, more fixed issuance. How did you think about, or how are you thinking about value accrual, especially when you're dealing with more with apps and potentially enterprise sales?
Great question. And we have thought deeply about value accrual and the tokenomics. I think interesting thing about our token is that it's not just, or we don't just see it as a way of people who kind of want to buy into the whole thing, hoping to benefit from the upside. The token actually has a very, very specific use at scale within the network, which is economic security. And that's because, yes, there's this small token lock you need to do to run a node in the network, but every holder will actually have the opportunity to stake their tokens and sort of delegate it to a node operator that they know and trust. And so there's sort of, the token is a unit of trust within the network. And the beauty of that is, as we roll out the staking mechanism and hopefully see large swathes of the token backing, different nodes and giving them trust, it raises a barrier of entry for an adversary to come in and try and take over the network. And so that means that there's a direct use for holders to stake the token as trust. And we want those users who stake and bring their trust in and contribute to the economic security to benefit from a portion of that revenue. And kind of, instead of going directly the buy and burn route, we just add in as much utility as possible and reward people who genuinely use this utility of the token for the network.
Yeah. When looking at other DePINs, what lessons, insights have you kind of learned over the years? What have there been any models that have kind of inspired you or contributed to how you're thinking about designing anyone?
There is one phenomenon that we certainly thought about a lot when designing these tokenomics, which is this potential death spiral you see, where as a token price declines for whatever reason, and plenty of those right now with the current market, the protocol is forced to emit more to maintain the current network size, and you get this sort of death spiral. People have to dump the token to survive, and therefore more is emitted. We were very conscious of that and wanted to avoid doing that from the beginning. We'd rather have a fixed outflow, let the network find a new, potentially smaller equilibrium in terms of size, and sort of find more qualitative ways to guarantee a sustainable network. And the hardware is a big part of that. Because unlike running a server, which might cost $6 to $10 a month, once you have the hardware, the electricity costs are next to nothing to run it. And so it's a baseline of nodes that we know are always going to be switched on, especially if they're also protecting user privacy. So we've tried to sort of guarantee a certain network size of stability without risking this death spiral and massive inflation and outflow of tokens.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. It's one thing growing and scaling a network. It's another thing keeping the lights on. You see that in DePIN, and you also see that in telco. traditional ISP stuff. So the tokenomics has been a lot of work was put in to really ensure that does not happen. For me personally, being a community guy, I see a lot of DePIN projects and I sort of see them fail to resonate with retail. We have a pretty good retail community, and I just think that's really good to see. There's like a high amount of community spirit, but also like teaching and learning and people helping each other set up nodes and things like this. And that's always a pleasure for me to see.
Yeah, I also wanted to touch on just kind of regulations and navigating that landscape. Is that like a problem, a roadblock that you guys have had to encounter at all? Or is that just not really an issue for a protocol like anyone?
To be honest, we had more concerns around the whole token side of things and that issuance. And I think there has been a strong precedent for how to set that up. When we rebranded from ATOR to anyone, we went and set up the foundation and structure in a way that was aligned to 99% of projects. So that was probably our biggest concern that we've sort of resolved. In terms of the regulation of being a decentralized VPN and routing traffic, we have the benefit of some pretty strong precedents, not least the Tor network itself, where we have seen ISPs go in and shut down nodes where they don't like the traffic going through. But we've never actually gotten to the point where a relay operator was held legally responsible for the traffic that went through. And so that precedent is very, very helpful to us in being able to establish this network, as well as where our limitations and responsibilities lie with what is open source software.
Makes sense. Yeah, I also want to talk about the community. I think one of the strongest benefits of DePIN is being able to rally community, both behind your protocol, your token, and really overcome the cold start problem through crypto, just vibes and token incentives. How have you thought about building your community and how's that going so far?
I think the actual utility of the project really resonates with lots of people. I think people in Web3 just seem to be more aware and more conscious of privacy and censorship and overarching governments and things like that. So I think the utility really just resonated with a lot of people. I think the way the token was launched as well, in fact, it was a stealth launch on the Ethereum network. And the timing was quite good. It was quite bearish conditions, so a lot of the tourists were away. So they built that early community pretty quickly. And I think the fact that the team and the community, the community is always heard. Their feedback is always taken on board. I think that's really important. I think whenever projects or investors take community for granted, it never ends well. So I think, just mutual respect, living up to promises. All the code is delivered in a fully open source manner. I always say trust code, not promises or white papers or even light papers really. And just doing your best to stick to schedules. And treat the community with respect. If you do miss a deadline, acknowledge it and just keep working.
Yeah, on that, how have you thought about governance? Have you thought about DAO structures? Could you just kind of run us through that?
We have the stepping stones in place to transition to a proper governance structure interspersed with the foundation. I think a little tentative with governance so far. We're still building out and finding our initial strong use cases and building out the network. And I think we'd rather first extend freedom to people in how they run nodes. We set the incentives. We don't sort of spoon feed exactly how you should run a node. This is what we want. We want this bandwidth. These are the locations we'll reward more. Innovate on it. So right now, I think community members have a lot of autonomy over how the network is run and the nodes, but not so much over how the protocol as a whole is administered. And I think that's one of our big goals for 2025 to, release these controls to the DAO, set things up so that you can actually define things on chain. We've built a lot of things on chain, which typically are not done on chain, including even hosting our dashboard. Distributing relay rewards is done entirely on chain. So it sets itself up quite nicely to have smart contracts go and define things like the reward rate, what we reward, how we set that up. We're building to that, but probably not the priority right now. I'd say the priority is adoption.
Yeah, kind of on that. What's your roadmap look like for 2025? Are there any major milestones that you're trying to hit?
Oh, absolutely. So a little bit of context. 2024, I think, was very much the year of network growth, going from nothing to 10,000 plus nodes in a fast performant onion routing network. 2025 is very much the year, I'd say, for two things. One is adoption by users and apps. And two is bringing in the value accrual and stronger links between the protocol and the token. So on terms of adoption, we're releasing our own desktop VPN app and mobile apps, and working on some of those pivotal, turning some of the partnerships from last year into genuine integrations with things like browsers, RPC with Pangea, AI and AI agents with Eliza OS and a few other partners, making those use cases real and scaling with them and releasing those apps. And when it comes to the token value accrual, the big release is this staking mechanism I mentioned earlier, ability to delegate your stake to a Relay family and receive sort of rewards and kickbacks for doing that. And I think both of those things will sort of put the control back in our hands. We may not necessarily be able to control how the crypto market looks, but we're building things that transcend that. And it's completely in our hands to scale up and build a better product.
Yeah, also on partnerships, I think one of the large benefits of DePIN and crypto more broadly is composability, interoperability. How have you thought about, starting partnerships? You touched on AI and a few other sectors, but where do you see the most opportunity?
I think AI is definitely underexplored right now by our team and by our protocol, especially with the growth of AI agents, where these pieces of software have increasing access to your operating system. You're no longer just chatting to them. They can maybe see your files, see your code, see what you're doing. I think naturally, no one needs to be told that there is a privacy concern there. I think people are coming to that conclusion all by themselves. And knowing that what you do today, tomorrow, the day after is all being siphoned off to the same server, and it can all be tied back to you, your personal activities with maybe what you're doing, freelance work, all of that being collated. I think people already are starting to see a problem with that and starting to find solutions. So I think if we can add in this routing through our network and essentially break the link between what you were doing yesterday versus what you were doing today from the service perspective, I think that has the potential to really take off. And you mentioned composability. I think that's a huge part of it. We don't want to create necessarily pieces of software that you have to download. We create plugins that hopefully plug into everything.
Yeah, I think just to wrap up, how do you feel about the state of DePIN right now? We're obviously in ETH Denver, tons of DePIN projects here. I'd say the overall crypto vibes are a bit more quiet than last year, but I'm seeing very strong activity in DePIN. So how do you feel about the current state of the sector?
I'll maybe say a few words, but let DNB speak as well. Suddenly, things feel slower this year compared to the beginning of last year. A year ago, DePIN was just about emerging as a term, and it was sort of catching on like wildfire. Suddenly, we can be very happy that DePIN is now an ingrained term. It was fantastic to put a label on this, and Messari deserves a bit of thanks for that. It's helped bring these projects together and make it an investable category. A trend that I'm hoping we'll see less of is DePIN projects being able to find thousands or even hundreds of thousands of node runners, but not making them into a community. I think we worked with Hotspotty and some of the early Helium contributors, and at that time it was very much one big community of people, innovating and playing this game and trying to get better, versus someone who doesn't really care, who just sees a yield and runs an app in the background. And I'm hoping that we can keep that community spirit and sort of builders mindset versus just trying to blindly get as many people to run something in the background for some money. I'm hoping that community spirit and builder spirit is something that we can keep alive and keep within the space. And I don't know if you see that or see that as a trend at all. Curious for your thoughts too.
Yeah, so what I've been saying throughout the conference is last year, DePIN was kind of put on the map, got a lot of hype, a lot of very cool experimental protocols from, privacy VPNs to energy to content delivery networks to mobility. I think this year seeing fewer ideas, fewer early stage protocols are just emerging and more of a focus on scaling, right? So I think it's really starting to generate revenue, starting to get that demand side going, moving the industry from a $40 to $50 million revenue sector to, $100 million to the $1 billion range, really start to validate the use case and its underlying framework. So I think it's really about building and growth. And I think there's a lot of people on the sidelines who believe in DePIN. They've heard of it. They're like, this is real utility that can be created by crypto. They really want to see that validated before they go all in and start to reconfigure their perception of crypto overall. So yeah, I think it's the year of scaling and growth and just building and putting your head down.
That's a very hard act to follow. I agree with everything you said there. Yep, I agree 100%.
Awesome. So yeah, for listeners, you want to learn more about anyone, what's the best place to find more information?
definitely the Twitter. Check us out at anyone FDN, the Anyone Foundation. And from there, do join our community. It's very active. You'll feel like you're part of a movement. So I encourage everyone to come and check out Anyone and be anyone.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on. This has been Fully Diluted, live from ETH Denver.
Thank you, Dylan.
Thank you for having us.